Welcome to the Under the Hat podcast, the show where we talk about everything and anything that is top of mind in education. The goal is to provide meaningful conversation to what is currently happening in our classrooms. Stories, pains, moments of success. We want to hear it all. Welcome back, friends. This, for me at least, is a beautiful Saturday morning, April 6th. I know for others, it might be in the afternoon. If you're watching it in the future, if you are listening, watching live, feel free to drop in questions, curiosities, whatever it is. Just super happy to be back. I know it's been about a week or so. Things are starting to doop a little bit as we get towards the end of this first season, but I'm super excited because we have a very, very, very passionate leader, educator, author, and I fairly recently read his book, and I'm happy to dive into the conversation and learn more with him. We are joined today by Matthew J. Bowerman, phenomenal human, and I'm just excited to dive in. Matthew, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to our collaboration and conversing about all things Heartleading.
Yeah. And so I kind of, had a little bit of liberty with the title of this episode, Heart Leading. I do know that your book, Heart Leader, is something that is available for all. I, for one, enjoyed it. I think the big thing that I enjoyed was like the way the book starts with your own story, like your own honesty of things. But I'm going to let you kind of speak more on that. Before we dive into the book, though, kind of Matthew, if like people don't know you, kind of are curious like what your context is, maybe a little bit of backstory of how you got into education and the work that you're currently doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think my best role, my favorite role is I'm married and I'm a father of six. So like all things come from I think that the love and the family piece in terms of connectivity and connection and engagement and just um, trying to keep in mind every day the work I'm doing and how I would want my own children treated and supported. So I've been in education. This is the end of 26 years now. Um, and I've taught everything from middle school to high school and college and done summer elementary school teaching and programming and everything from all areas of the arts, special education, English, reading, dance and theater. And I think prior to becoming an educator, I was a professional actor, singer, dancer as well, and worked a little in law enforcement and was also a medic. So I found a lot of my work, or at least like kind of like a through line for it, has really been seeking out ways to connect with people, with audiences, in service based ways to storytell and to connect, and so that I've been in, like I said, the educational space for quite a while now, and I've been in school administration, which is what I do now. I'm an elementary school assistant principal, and I guess it's been about 7 years now in administration, and the other 18, 19 or whatnot has been as a classroom teacher and team leader and department chair and all those things. And then on the side now, my other kind of parallel careers, my author work and my research and my speaking and training around trauma responsive educational practices, trauma responsive supports for students, and trauma responsive like engagement and bridge building with parents, caregivers, and communities.
Yeah. And that's, I think that I'm sure we'll talk about this in a bit, but that's kind of what I appreciated about your book is that you took that topic of, trauma responsiveness in all the contexts. I feel like you kind of see it throughout the book. So those of you that are listening that have not read the book, first of all, I just encourage you to pick it up. If you're in any way involved in education, because it does do a good job of like, what does this look like on the teacher side? What does this look like from the student side? What does this look like from the parent side? So let's kind of dive into the book, if you don't mind, Matthew. So Heart Leader, kind of tell us a little bit about it and maybe like what led you to write the book to begin with?
Sure. I think, and I appreciate your kindness around it. It's definitely like literally a labor of love. Um, I worked on it maybe about 11 years. And probably before that, for years, I was collecting, anecdotal observations and notes from like teachers and students and families, because I've always kind of been a writer and always been in the arts, and throughout my life. So I just love to collect stories. And so kind of taking them and aligning them to mine, looking at how my journey, my story, my background, is reflected in theirs and different than those I've served throughout my career. Looking at my failings, my mistakes throughout my entire career, and how that aligns to where I've gotten better, where I need to continue to build my capacity, has always just been, me artifacting and archiving, experiences and opportunities and stories, which ultimately led into me thinking about trying to elevate my work, on a more, I guess, bigger national and beyond scale, and trying to connect and bring the trauma responsive lessons forward, seeing how critical those mental health needs are, and those social emotional supports are post pandemic. I mean, they were already there to begin with, but just how elevated all that work's become. And so, 3, 4, 5 years now, really writing and creating the book, as a way to really take my origin story apart and plug it into the work. And then from that place, like you mentioned, trying to address trauma and trauma responsiveness and social emotional supports and like school family engagement from a trauma responsive kind of restorative lens, and trying to kind of lead all that forward really was that's what really drove the book to its birth. And so, yes, I appreciate the way you kind of reference what the book does. It really starts off with kind of actualizing origin, what I call origin building, and the nature of what that is, and like the sense that, creating safe and predictable trauma responsive environments for students and staff and school community, parent, caregivers, et cetera, really has to happen from a place of a person really, who is doing that work, being as healthy as possible, as grounded as possible, as clear and as honest with their own trauma, their own needs, and really doing the hard work at times, messy work at times, to be as emotionally accessible, emotionally available, as authentic and vulnerable and honest in the work in order to engage in that work with other people. You don't have to know another person's trauma or their emotional needs to love them and to support them and to educate them and to engage and build with them. But you do need to deeply and authentically build relationships with the adults you support and serve, with the children that you are there to serve, and with the families that you're connecting and building with. And so the book then branches out into empowering and supporting students and engaging, and training and elevating teachers in their capacities, and connecting and bridge building with families, with this overarching trauma responsive lens, and this kind of concept, like the branding, me being the heart leader, and the whole Heartleading concept is around love and around operationalizing love in strategic ways daily with students, with staff, and with families, every day in all of the spaces of a school, finding ways that love can really be channeled, in various kinds of languages, right? The work love languages, the personal love languages, but finding ways to really turn love into a way to really bridge mental health, social emotional needs, and to help elevate everything from attendance, to academics, to the parent, caregiver, and school relationships. And so the book really dives deep into those things. A lot of research to back it up and to support it throughout. And then, of course, like you mentioned, my experience and my journey, and then a very large amount of collected stories in the book, quotes from other leaders around the country, from students throughout my 26 years and their families.
Wow, that's phenomenal. I just appreciate how like you're just trying to infuse that love in almost the most like routine things that we do as teachers, right? Or administrators or as parents. And I know that at least for me, like my experience was being in a school, it's sometimes like teachers are trying to think about the social emotional learning, right? They're trying to, meet students where they're at, the relationship building that happens in the classroom. But I think sometimes, maybe not often, but sometimes it's easy to forget that trauma is existing in your backyard. Like trauma is existing with some of these families and some of these students. And I think like your book is a good reminder of that for us, because I, for one, would sometimes that wasn't top of mind, right? Like when I'm dealing with a student who maybe is struggling academically or maybe struggling with behavior, like it's really easy to like not even go there in our minds. And I don't know if that's something that you've come across often, with teachers that you have worked with. But again, it's something that should be reminded on a daily basis, I feel.
No, I mean, 100%. I mean, 100%. I think, you know, our school staff, from the cafeteria worker to the bus driver to the paraeducator to the teacher, are, oh my gosh, they're tasked with like an immense weight on a daily basis, with everything that they're managing and juggling, and do phenomenal work across this country and beyond with servicing students and supporting academic and social emotional needs in school. It's like an everyday battle to try to, manage, understand, mitigate, and there hasn't been enough training, and there's not enough support, and certainly not enough hours in the day. And yet there we are every day in school spaces wearing far more hats than we thought. And teachers are struggling with everything from pay to pedagogy to lesson planning to evaluation, all the different things that they're trying to navigate. So certainly they, are trying to find the best ways to connect with their kids and build with their kids and challenge and inspire their kids, all the things that like we got into this work for. But at the same time, that also elevates, school staff, just like it does for administrators and parents too in their ways, but it elevates us into a place where frequently, because we're managing and juggling so much, we get reactive. There's knee-jerk reflex to our behavior. And assuming positive intent for the majority of people, that's not what they mean to do or want to do. And yet it still comes out that way with harsh word, a harsh tone, the whole power struggle, of adult to child. Things become punitive when it really takes time to really step back for that and making sure, like I mentioned before, that we are regulated in order to identify and operationalize regulation strategies with the children, with the other adults we're serving, and supporting families in those ways. It's just so critical in that way. And that's where, trying to work from a preventative lens and trying to work responsively versus reactively takes time, takes training, takes patience, takes, like I mentioned, a lot of self-work. And it really also relies on a culture and a climate in a school community that believes in that messaging, that follows it through with behaviors, and that everybody is really on board from all the different stakeholders around what trauma responsive, teaching, learning, and community building are, what they feel like, what they look like, on a daily basis, what it means to create social emotional supports in schools, what mindfulness activities are and how they work to reduce hyperarousal, or, what it means to promote self-compassion for adults and children and families in schools, from everything about what the meetings look like to the messaging on the boards to what the school grounds look like, and how it communicates this continuous, like recursive, coming back to again and again sense of like, everyone has value here. Everyone is loved here. We repair harm here. We work on forgiveness here. We work on operationalizing the sense that everyone is coming to us with things. And that might be trauma. That might be intergenerational trauma. That might just be anxiety or depression or loss, that they've experienced. And our school staff, like I mentioned, are carrying so much because they're living trauma adjacently to all of that, and carrying a lot of compassion fatigue around the daily trying to mitigate kids while they're working with their own anxiety and trying to juggle all these things to be the best teachers in the classrooms they can be, or the best paraeducators, or whatever it is that they're doing in terms of service. And it really does complicate things, and there's a lot of nuance, which is why I mentioned the work is critical to any measure of success in school, but is extremely complex. And like I mentioned, can be really messy because we're dealing with, hyperarousal. We're dealing, like I mentioned, with regulation. We're dealing with, some substantial issues around choice and control, and a lot of loss and pain. But I think more importantly, a lot of love and hope opportunities are there too. But it takes time and it takes work to build those things, and like really supportive culture and climate that can be like collaborated on and designed to support those things.
Yeah, no, and like I think that like what you're talking about, there's very few that would disagree with the issue at hand, right? Like there's very few like, there's no trauma in our schools. I think
Right.
that's a general consensus, right? But I guess where the question becomes, and it's not an easy question to answer because we have not answered it yet. If you are a school leader, if you are a superintendent, a site principal, a teacher, right? Like, and that there's serious issues around this problem in your space. What would you say is like first steps, right? Like, and I know that you spoke a lot on like the ways of like, of how to address this, but going back to the fact that there's so much to do, there's so much on our plates, like all the way up and down, sideways, like no matter what you're doing at a school site or what you're doing for a school district, there's just so much. So what could be like some first steps of trying to address this issue?
I love that. So anybody can be a heart leader in any role, in any respective place and way in the work. I reference in the book as well, but I think it's important to first, like I mentioned, start with self. I mean, for every single person in their role, assuming positive intent, to the very best that they show up on that given day, every given day, that they're there because time is short and kids come first, and are there to support and service of children, to collaborate and support and elevate the other adults around them, while dismantling bias, implicit bias, racism, and fighting to dismantle and speak out against those things that have marginalized so many indigenous communities and communities of color, especially when you present or look like myself. And that you're surrounding yourself with other experts who believe in the work and are willing to message and stand up for all the different pieces of it. So I think there's that kind of philosophical and mental place for oneself to kind of process through. And then there's also the personal, social, emotional work on a mental health level that one's doing and pursuing, because the best kind of health I think you can do is mental health that impacts everything else about self. So there's that work that I'm a heavy advocate for, especially if you're working through mitigating loss in your life or trauma, or personal relationship, all of those things. Like it is critical. There is just simply nothing wrong with not being okay, and that we are fragile and vulnerable. And, I just can't share that enough. That there's such beauty in the imperfection and such opportunity in it to challenge self, lean in, and grow from it. But it certainly takes time, and it certainly takes work for oneself. So there's that piece. And then I think strategically, the next step there within the school environment is looking at your role and your responsibilities. If you're a leader, you have a different place you can kind of approach this from with a staff. If you're a staff member, then you're reaching out to your teams, department chairs, colleagues to come forward to administration and kind of share out ideas on this. And that's really looking at the data around your school. What's the history of the school? What do the elders and the others in the neighborhood share about the history of this school? How the community sees it? What are all those kind of like voice data pieces they're sharing about the data of the school in terms of what is this environment about? What's the vibe? What's the energy? What's the mood, that climate and culture? And if it's already seen like that, then great, you're building off of the shoulders of giants who helped create those things. And if it's not there yet, then we're not going to be reductive and look at all the things that aren't working well, aren't happening. I mean, the data is going to show those things, but we're going to look at, okay, what works well here? What can we really start to ratchet up and turn the volume up on? And that's going to really look at, from practices in lunchrooms to like when someone comes to the building or calls the school, consistency and structure. Consistency and structure, like in any classroom space, really set the tone for helping students feel secure, reduce anxiety, bring triggers, way, way down. It's just been psychologically and scientifically proven in educational theory around those pieces. And so looking at and trying to take like an audit, in essence, we'll call it an educational audit of the spaces that you're in. It might just start with your classroom. I would like to create a trauma-sensitive space in my classroom. I would like to create a socially, emotionally grounded space in my classroom that my administrator has approved or is great, is fine with me doing that. And I'm going to start building that space, and I'm going to meet with my students. We're going to have conversation, whether it's a 5th grade, a 1st grade, a 12th grade class, around what that looks like, because they have to have buy-in. They need to know the rules of how that space is used. Again, consistency, structure, boundaries, and expectations, all very, very, very clear ways we can love children. Some of the best ways we can love our own kids and the kids we serve in schools is to love them with boundaries. Consistent boundaries and expectations around the decision-making that they have, and giving them choice and autonomy in those spaces as well. And so having those conversations about it, how long one would use the space, if they're signing in or signing out, are there things that they can do there, things they can bring in? I was talking to a colleague recently, like if it's a kindergarten class, is it a small tent with bean bags and there's rocker chairs and each child is allowed to bring in their own, stuffy, their own little stuffed animal or a picture of their family or something that holds meaning and emotional connection for them, that when they're upset and that teacher or that para or that support staff is doing like a mindful breathing moment with them, that they can hold onto that image and kind of channel some positive energy through. And we're creating now an inner place. So it's not adult and child, but it's two people caring about validating this child's emotional experience and together trying to work through grounding them, helping them to regulate and get to a calm and safe place within a safe space to do the work that they need to do to feel better in that moment, to then carry on positively through the rest of their day. Knowing that adult, those other students, any adults around them are going to come back again and again to support them. They're not going to walk away because they threw the Chromebook down or they cried or they screamed out or punched a wall or kicked the locker, because we show back up in spaces again and again to support and love our kids wherever they are in things. And so I think that's another place to come from. And then I think also there's conversations at administrator to staff and staff to administration, and just as a community, bringing in parents and whatnot to also look at the messaging of our school, the school mission and vision as well. If you have those, to look at what is being communicated around, what do we prioritize around mental health in our school from a trauma responsive lens? What are we communicating about restorative work in our schools from a trauma responsive lens? What kind of social emotional strategies are we going to try to employ in each classroom? Are we going to use a restorative circle? Every class uses community circles. We're going to make sure that there are like calming corners, Zen dens, like the trauma sensitive space in each room that has fidgets and rocker stools and bands on seats. Are we going to work out that there's a daily mindful minute scattered throughout the day, that when a certain chime rings across the school, everybody is going to sit and do a grounding exercise, seated down, feet on the ground, and work through, a body sensory piece, because, there's a focus on an interoceptive awareness and the sensations and the feelings in the body, especially when you become heightened. And so everybody practices that together as an entire school and then moves forward into a gentle way to continue their day. So there are all kinds of layers and opportunities there, but I think it starts self and then moves up to make, one change. I think if an entire school is all about making one simple shift in their personal practice in a classroom, an office, a hallway, a main office, and let's say that there's 800 children in a school and 120 staff, Suddenly you have 920 new decisions being made around mental health and trauma responsive education just by making one simple switch around a philosophy, around language used, around a behavior, and you're transforming every single person in that school. So that's kind of how I think try to answer the question.
Yeah, no, I loved how you brought forth like real examples, right? Because I think like for me, that's what I need to hear in terms of like, okay, what could all of this look like? I think that sometimes, well, no, probably all the time, from the teacher standpoint, it's challenging with, because it seems like it's a matter of prioritizing this work, right? And so, and I'm gonna fit it into the bucket called teaching, because in that bucket you have, in my mind, you have two things that we get wrapped up in, and one is curriculum and the other thing is grading, right? And
Big time.
so like to me the big balance is like, what's the balance between that teacher, those teacher tasks, like those two things, and the work that you're speaking of, or can they complement each other in some way?
I think they can. I mean, think about what we've done in classrooms, you and I, and anybody who's listening, and every person who's ever, stepped through a door into a classroom and suddenly seen 35, 25 or more, young adults or little children looking back at them in that moment. And what it looks like then and feels like to have a planning progression, about what we're navigating in curriculum and curriculum guides and the grading piece and navigating benchmarks and assessments. And in my opinion, frankly, a real significant issue around a culture of over testing, but the testing as well. I think the opportunity for intersection there comes with the adult or adults, whether it be that you're partnering with a school psychologist, school counselor, behavior interventionist, your para-educator, you're doing a co-teaching model with a special education teacher, all these different heroes, right? And any of those dynamics, your day is long. Your day is fraught with amazing miracles and incredible difficulty. I mentioned this weight before, under the umbrella of teaching, right? Even if you're driving the bus, or even if you're just, a lunch aide, or even if you're working in the cafeteria serving students, there are opportunities under this teaching umbrella you mentioned. And so I think in any of those spaces, but we'll talk about the classroom, where a teacher feels weary or starts to feel their blood pressure, right? Their heart rate rise. They're aware of the sensations in their fingertips, the tingling when they're getting frustrated. They're just about to snap. They feel that they put their hand down too hard on a desk when they saw for the third time. They have to ask somebody to please stop talking, or someone brings out the old cell phone and they've got it, right? The simple thing I've said a million times, you said a million times, we've heard it a million times, behavior is communication. Whether they're struggling with something they're on their own, they need to disappear into another space for a minute. They're afraid, upset, angry, overexcited, hyper aroused, whatever it is. The adult who's just about to react, right? I have two different ways I've always looked at this and talked about this. I call it my rubber band theory, right? That teaching, take a rubber band and you stretch it, right? So it's white. Bing, that high place of tension, like teaching lives there all the time. And that could be positive and negative stressors, but it lives in that place for all of us as educators. And we have to also take time to gently decrease the amount of tension we're putting on that band, or just like shaking up a big old soda bottle as hard as you can, and then gently starting to unscrew the cap, that little like escape of air and all that pressure. We feel that all the time in classrooms. Even if we're sitting in the staff lounge having our lunch, we know what we're about to go back to, or we're about to walk into the building in the morning with our coffee and our bag and all the extra hours we put in the night before. We know that weight. We know that pressure, but we also know what we're called to serve and who we're called to serve and why we stepped into it. So it's those moments in the classroom that I use or have used to do this work. I'll share that moment, not an overshare, but share that moment. I'm really feeling like I need to take a breath. Everybody. And that's where I'm going to move into my mindful moment with the whole class. Or I simply stop, just like finding teachable moments. Those moments about what you need as an adult are just as impactful and powerful as the ones you're trying to identify with the kids every day. And taking that moment and say, guys, I got a great story to tell you. Suddenly, everybody in that class is going to turn and look right at you. We went from sitting like this to leaning in, like watching a great movie or a great show, because something's changed. You've changed the dynamic. You've broken that. I have to get through this assessment today. I have to get through this curriculum. We all know we have to get through those things. And I'm not downplaying any of that. That work is critical. But academic success cannot happen. It simply just cannot happen without the relational power that occurs or that can occur, and that social emotional well-being that exists between the adults and the children in the spaces we occupy. And I think those are places to do it, and giving your room color and life and dimension around those things, to take that minute to sit down and say, everybody, we're going to do some free drawing for 5 minutes. I'm going to be like, what? Yeah. I'm going to pass out paper or pull out your journals. I used to do this one thing where I had students, we brought in all kinds of cardboard materials, and everybody built their own kind of journal. Ones that like came apart like a Rubik's Cube that unfolded. They loved them. They could pull them out anytime they needed to. But there were times where I'm like, guys, journal time. And they knew, like, I'm taking a break. They're taking a break. 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I put on the timer for myself, so they understand the same timers we use with them, we use for adults too. And we take that moment, we color, we draw, we talk about it, we laugh about it. Somebody shows me this. I want everybody in the room to draw the silliest picture of Mr. Bowerman that you can do. The craziest, whacked out thing, like Picasso style, whatever. Make me the superhero. Boom, let's do this. I have had the funniest conversations, and everybody's good again. And we breathe and we refresh. And I'm talking about my youngest kids are the oldest ones I've done this with. You just have to like lens it in a way that's appropriate in that given space for that given age, and you play. They're still learning there, and you play, and there's still love there. You play, and there's still teaching there. You play, and you're creating a new relationship dynamic and a connection that you're going to joke about days later. You might put all those pictures up on the wall and have an art gallery of like different days, and on different days, Mr. Bowerman's going to try to dress like that picture or make that silly face or whatever it is. It's like high school seniors get like all like jazzed up by those kind of jokes and conversations just as much as the fourth grader. And then you jump back into the lesson, and you can tie little things in from those moments into the math, into those number bonds, into like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde novel, like whatever it is. Like, I'm not saying it's easy, and it's certainly not perfect, but the opportunities that are within the classroom can really come from the work that you need to do for yourself, or those moments you need to take because of the long day that you're taxed with, and the long work that's coming when you go home that night, or when you go home late because you're still at school. And that's for administrators. That's for every level of school staff, but specifically for our teachers.
Yeah, no, like as you were explaining all that, like something that I was thinking of is like the classroom atmosphere has to be the vehicle to get them through.
Amen.
But if the vehicle is broken and you let it stay broken, there's no way that you all are getting there in one piece. And so like for me, like kind of go back to it, like if we don't address these issues in our classrooms, we're not going anywhere as a society. Like, and to me, that's what's so powerful about your message and the work that you're doing, is that A, it's super important, and B, I feel like, why aren't we talking about this more? And I mean, like you and I are talking about it now, and hopefully people listen, right? But like, it's such a thing that I feel, at least right now, like I felt we were talking a lot more about this, more around the pandemic. But the farther we move away from the pandemic, I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, the less we're talking about it.
Well, I think staffing across the country, lack of staffing in the mental health profession and behavior intervention spaces in schools, limited staffing, not enough training for our teachers who want it, who are interested in it, who believe in it, and want to pursue their work in the trauma responsive ways. It hasn't. Some of the lessons that we could have learned, I think we haven't held on to, like you mentioned, like just the simple fact of continuously giving autonomy and choice in a classroom and embedding empathy in a classroom every day. We need that as adults as much as the kids do. And those are some of the most important pieces of the engine on that vehicle you're talking about. And if they're broken, there's no forward or backward. There's neither direction. There's just stuck. And stuck doesn't do anything but damage kids, harm adults, and create an environment that is only going to ground itself to a halt repeatedly on a day-to-day basis. And then you've got burned out staff who are frustrated, who are at a loss for words. We see student absenteeism become chronic. We see grades, crash. We see assessments and benchmarks not being met. We see the data like skewed all over the place. And at the heart of it, we see kids like crying out in K-12 for help that they're not getting and not able to get. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just so much truth in that. I have about, 2 more questions for you, Matthew, before we wrap up today.
Sure.
And this next question is around the book and the work that you're doing. Where can people go? Because you mentioned training, so with professional development around this issue, what suggestions do you have for leadership, for teachers, anybody that's seeking more information, more practical training around this work? Where are some places that they can go?
So I think there's a couple different things that embedded there. That's a lovely question. I think first, if you enjoy scholarship, right? If you're a reader, if that is very appealing to you, there's a lot of literature. There's a lot of literature that exists around it. Like The Body Keeps the Score, for example, is a wonderful book around trauma. There are multiple, books out there that talk about this kind of work in really powerful ways and touch on it in different types of ways, based on how you're trying to build an inclusive environment, a trauma responsive one, how you're trying to look at social emotional work. So everything, from Mohammed Khalifa to like Brene Brown. They are writing and talking about everything from vulnerability to trauma to forgiveness to emotional regulation. Vanderkolk, like I mentioned, The Body Keeps the Score. You literally can go on online and pull so many different resources. One thing I'll say to that point, if you reach out to me directly, I will send you resources. I have some wonderful resources. You're always welcome to be a part of Heartleader with me and pick up my book. Obviously, right? There's that business plug, but far, far, far beyond me, experts, geniuses, and giants, far beyond me, I will give you information about their work, what they say, what they do, what they've created. If you want to reach out through my connections, you can hit me up on X at MJ Bowerman. You could my site link up there. You're welcome to use that and contact me here as well. I'm happy to send you a host of resources, books, articles, things like that. I think from there, you're also looking into the professional development opportunities that your school system at the state level and district level may offer. I believe still, Steve, that there is a lot of focus on this work. As much as there is around cultural responsive anti-racism approaches, there is still a heavy focus on social, emotional, and trauma responsive supports nationwide, federally, state, and locally. And I think there are professional development opportunities and training. We just need more of it, more consistency of it, and staff in schools to support our educators who can help train them, but also stand alongside them in the work consistently and helping our school counselors and school psychologists and behavioral people and our special education people with so much that they're balancing. So there's PD out there at those state and local levels that you can access through your systems as well. And then overarching on the national level, there are a variety of conferences, like through TINET. Elena Weinstein and Brad Weinstein with teachers, like I mentioned, TINET, doing like amazing work in trauma responsive education, teaching and leading. And there's workshops, conferences that you can be a part of to like go out and actually be engaged, physically, mentally, emotionally in the work. And then, of course, I think backing up off of that, there's like the mental health piece for, personal, whether it's, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, whether it's EMDR, whether it's, some other kind of like work that you want to engage in on a personal mental health level. There are many supports like that school systems have with, plugging into like employee assistance programming that gets mental health supports and education for self. And then like through, obviously, personal insurance or your job insurance that can help you access behavioral mental health pieces that you can reach out to and get, because I think that work again is so critical to all the other work that comes after it.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. We really appreciate all that insight, all that guidance. I know that I've learned a lot just hearing you speak on this, Matthew. Just
Thank you.
super, super big shout out to you. So we always wrap up the show with that one question, what's under the hat. And so what that means is at this moment, and you may have already touched on it, right? And so feel free to keep this nice, short and sweet if you'd like. But with what you're doing, the work that you're doing, being at your district, at your school site, as a leader, as an author, perhaps, what is top of mind for you right now in terms of what you're seeing currently in education?
I'll look at it threefold, just because I write and try to approach like this. So from the student standpoint, I really am trying to make sure with the children we serve, and I see my county doing this, I see my state doing this, and I definitely see this nationally. I just think we need to continue to elevate the work around it. But with regards to our children that we serve, making sure that we are prioritizing their mental health and the resources that we can provide them in the K-12 spaces, and that those are consistently provided for them, and that they have spaces within the school and outside the school to access care and well-being related, like healthcare and mental health. I think for our adults, the educators, specifically teachers, but our school staff, mechanisms to support them consistently with regards to working trauma adjacently with their compassion fatigue, with the stress and traumas that they navigate on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. In summers during pre-service, a lot of work could be poured into that, money and staffing to help support there, and ways to engage them, to give them space and agency to release their voices in safe ways, to get supports and help and health when they need it. And if they can actualize that through their relationships with their administration, their colleagues, and in the broader sense of the school districts and states that they serve. And I think the biggest thing for families, caregivers, parents, is really consistent messaging coming from wherever school you serve around the work that's being engaged in this type of way in schools. Parents send their kids to school excited about learning, wanting their kids to have the very best experience possible and trusting that those adults are going to care for them. But unhealthy adults hurt children. Adults that haven't gotten the work that they need cause harm and damage to children when they're grown-ups. And we want to avoid that. And we want to avoid any stigmas or misconceptions around parents, caregivers, families worried about that happening in schools. We have enough in schools and around schools. We already know about those issues. They're in the headlines all the time of things that happen in schools and around schools that cause so much damage and harm. We want to make sure the messaging is really consistent and clear and bring them in constantly, building that bridge around the work we're engaging in around this type of thing, the social emotional strategies, the trauma responsive approach, restorative justice, cultural responsive approaches to creating like these inclusive environments. What that looks like in theory, because you can use those tools at home. And when you're unclear, unsure, that you know that you are valued enough as a member of that community that you can show up and engage in those conversations and ask those questions to get those tools and resources to take back and forth between home and school.
Absolutely. 100%.
That was a lot.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for sharing all of that. Yeah, no, it's good. No, it's good. It's good. I appreciate your time, Matthew. We appreciate your time. I know that anyone that is listening now or listening in the future is going to get a ton of insight, and I feel like inspiration of like where to go next around this work. So big shout out to Matthew. Thanks for being on. Hopefully we get to do it again. For all of those that are watching, listening, thank you so much for continuing to share and send that support to the show. And as always, you can catch this episode later. I always post it up online, but if you go to underhatpod.com, find it on the usual suspects like Spotify, Apple, all of those podcasting channels. And give me a follow. Under the Hat Pod. Feel free to send me a DM, what kind of topics you want to see on the show. Coming up on the month of May, that's when I'm wrapping up season 1. So we are doing a wrap up towards the end of that month. But this has been fun, friends. I hope that you got something out of this conversation. And I'm just excited to continue this journey with all of you that have been contributing and sending me that love for the show and for me individually. So without further ado, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Matthew. You all have a good day. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.